I'm Susan Yockey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, the Arab League finds limits to the pressure that can be placed on Syria.
The way Syria is positioned next to Iraq, next to Lebanon, next to Israel and Palestine, you're talking about a TNT box.
Israel seeks tougher Iran sanctions in the wake of a UN report. A U.S. panel says Pakistani schools are teaching religious intolerance. And the alleged mastermind of the Cole bombing is arraigned in military court. It's all ahead on VOA. The Arab League meets again Saturday to deal with Syria's broken pledge to end a crackdown on anti-government protesters. But VOA's Elizabeth Errett reports from our Middle East Bureau in Cairo there are limits to external pressure that can be placed on the nation.
Pressure is building on the Arab League to move decisively against the Syrian government, which has yet to keep a promise it made to the League last week to stop attacking civilians. Activists say more than 110 people have been killed since Syria announced it had agreed to the plan. Doubts about diplomatic efforts were on display outside League headquarters in Cairo Wednesday. Protesters who want to oust Syria's President Bashar al-Assad reject the idea that dialogue still has a chance, and they threw eggs at opposition members willing to talk, barring most from entering the building. But some outside League headquarters are willing to give the regional alliance one last chance. Hassan El-Salaha is a regional coordinator for the Syrian opposition. He says that if the Arab League can't settle the matter this Saturday, it should give responsibility for the issue of Syria to the UN Security Council. It's not clear what more the League can do, but so far it's been against international intervention. Adib Shishakli is a member of the opposition Syrian National Council. He spoke to VOA via Skype.
I understand the Arab League concern. The way Syria is positioned next to Iraq, next to Lebanon, next to Israel and Palestine, you're talking about a TNT box. I understand they're taking their time on the Syrian issue.
There's also a practical reason that no matter how bad the violence gets, the League is reluctant to call for outside military force, as it did against another member, Libya. Security analyst Anthony Cordesman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Libya was always a military joke. It bought lots of equipment. It had lots of forces on paper, but it had no real combat experience.
Cordesman contrasts this with Syria.
Syria is a real military power. It has fought Israel again and again. Its armored divisions can really fight. And it has an air force, which, if not anything like the capability of a NATO air force, is nothing like the Libyan force, which had almost no real capability.
No matter what happens at the Arab League or the UN, opposition member Shishakli says outside force may not be necessary.
The regime is not as powerful as it was. Yes, it's continuing its brutality against the people. We are seeing people getting killed every day. But I'm telling you, today we are much closer to freedom than any other day.
Still, demonstrators remain outside Arab League headquarters to keep up pressure for international action. But the Syrian government shows no sign of buckling, blaming much of the unrest on terrorists. Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Cairo.
The United States is again advising opponents of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad not to accept a government offer of amnesty if they surrender weapons. Syria alleges the stance signals U.S. support for armed insurrection, which the United States denies. VOA's David Gullist reports from the State Department.
The initial U.S. admonition against the amnesty offer late last week drew an angry response from the Syrian Foreign Ministry. But the State Department reaffirmed its position Wednesday, saying opponents would be unwise to accept the offer, given the Assad government's brutal track record. The Damascus government, in tandem with its nominal acceptance of an Arab League peace plan for the country, last week said it was giving armed protesters a week to turn themselves in along with their weapons. The government said those who surrendered and had not killed anyone would be released in a short time. In a dismissive comment last Friday, a State Department spokeswoman said she would not advise anyone to turn himself in to Damascus authorities. Drawing a Syrian charge, the United States was encouraging sedition, murder, and terrorism. Briefing reporters Wednesday, State Department Deputy Spokesman Mark Toner said the United States does not condone violence in Syria and stands by its advice on the amnesty.
We believe it would be unwise for regime opponents to turn themselves in, quite simply put. Given the Assad regime's track record of lawlessness, of torture, and thuggery against the opposition, we don't believe it's in anyone's interest to turn themselves in voluntarily to the Assad regime.
Toner said the hostile Syrian reaction to the U.S. comments was part of an effort by Damascus authorities to inject the United States into a conflict that he said is really between the Syrian government and its own people. Human rights groups say some 3,500 civilians, mostly peaceful demonstrators, have been killed in Syrian unrest since the pro-democratic campaign began in March. The Assad government says armed groups are driving the unrest and that hundreds of security personnel have been killed. In U.S. Senate subcommittee testimony Wednesday, Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs Jeffrey Feltman said the United States intends to work with friends and allies to tighten political and economic pressure on President Assad while supporting Syria's nonviolent opposition. He said the Syrian leader, head of what he termed a family-led mafia that's hijacked the state, is trying to turn the peaceful protest movement into an insurgency.
He knows how to deal with violence. He just uses violence against violence. What confounds him is this phenomenon of protesters yelling peaceful, peaceful, of shopkeepers closing their shops in solidarity with the protesters. That's what really puts Bashar al-Assad in a bind. And that's why we've been encouraging the opposition, despite the tremendous brutality they're facing, to keep to the peaceful principles to which they've subscribed.
The State Department's chief Middle East expert said the Syrian leader has become a regional pariah and can't last in office indefinitely. Feltman said U.S. Ambassador to Syria Robert Ford, recently withdrawn from Syria over security threats, will return to his post soon. Ford has drawn the ire of Syrian authorities for meeting with Syrian opposition figures and paying an unauthorized visit to the protest hotbed city of Hama last July. David Gullis, VOA News, the State Department.
We invite you to join in with your views at our online poll. This week we ask how serious is the Syrian regime about peace. You can cast your vote at voanews.com/ME and discuss the issue on Facebook on our Middle East Voices page. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has warned the United States and Israel not to attack Iranian nuclear sites, saying his country will respond to such action with strong slaps and iron fists. In a nationally televised speech to military cadets in Tehran today, Ayatollah Khamenei said Iran does not intend to start a conflict, but he said Iran will strike back. The comments were the strongest yet by Iran since Israeli officials began making references to potential military action against the Iranian nuclear program in recent days. Israeli leaders are urging the international community to stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons after a UN agency said Tehran's nuclear program was not just for peaceful purposes. There is debate in Israel about a possible military attack against Iran, but many opinion leaders say that should be a last resort. VOA's Scott Bobb reports from Jerusalem.
The Israeli reaction came one day after a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that said there was credible information that Iran was working to develop nuclear weapons. Opposition leader Tzipi Livni said the IAEA report makes clear where Iran is heading.
Iran threatens not only the interest of the free world, but the values of the free world. And this is something that needs to be defended. And we expect the international community, the free world, to stop Iran and prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
Iran says its nuclear program is for civilian purposes only, and that the UN report was based on lies. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak told Israel Radio Tuesday that tougher sanctions should be imposed.
המסקנה מזה היא שאנחנו בהזדמנות, כנראה אחרונה,
He said it appears we are at the last opportunity to impose drastic, internationally coordinated sanctions that would force Iran to stop its nuclear weapons program. But Barak indicated that military attacks on Iranian nuclear installations should be the last option. In the days before the UN report was published, there was a flurry of media speculation that Israel's government was considering a military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. Senior Iranian military officials warn that any attack against Iran will bring a severe response. But Israeli President Shimon Peres said that such an attack was becoming more and more likely. Last week, the Israeli military test-fired a ballistic missile. And Israeli rescue and medical workers held a drill to respond to a simulated foreign missile attack near Tel Aviv. Media reports in Israel and Western countries said Mr. Netanyahu and Defense Minister Barak were trying to convince a divided cabinet of the need for a military strike against Iran. But there reportedly was resistance from many ministers and senior military officials. Israeli analyst Yossi Melman says the benefits from any Israeli attack against Iran would not justify the repercussions, which could include Iranian missile attacks on Israel and possibly a regional conflict. But he said tougher economic sanctions are not likely to work.
I believe that it's not going to change the reality. Iran would continue with its efforts to have nuclear weapons. The sanctions would not be tough enough, and diplomatic measures are going to be exhausted. And we are once again in the same place arguing about the military option.
Defense Minister Barak said a military attack on Iranian nuclear facilities remains an option, though the least desirable one. And he said that while Israel prefers an international response, the country is, in his words, responsible for its own safety. Scott Bobb, VOA News, Jerusalem.
What is it like to study in the United States, and what do you have to do to get here? The Student Union is VOA's new blog that follows students from all over the world as they face challenges and opportunities of studying at American universities. Log on at blogs.voanews.com/student-union.
The alleged al-Qaeda mastermind of the 2000 terrorist attack in Yemen on the USS Cole, Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, was arraigned, that is, formally charged Wednesday in a military courtroom in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. 17 U.S. sailors were killed in the assault 11 years ago. VOA's Paul Westphaling spoke with correspondent Meredith Buell in Guantanamo Bay to cover the legal proceeding.
He was very relaxed. He appeared in a white prison uniform. He was very confident, almost appeared with a swagger as he strolled into the courtroom here, and he waved to the spectators, which include numbers of the victim's family. He smiled at the judge, Army Colonel James Pohl, and who spoke to him through an Arabic translator. In the courtroom, the families of the victims saw Nashiri for the first time, and one of them, a gentleman named John Clodfelter from Virginia, whose 21-year-old son Kenneth was killed in the blast, told reporters that he simply wanted to see the defendant face to face, and to quote him, he said, if nothing else, to let him know that, you haven't gotten away with this. As far as I'm concerned, he would like to see him given the death penalty. Nashiri was captured back in 2002, and he was interrogated in secret CIA prisons overseas and then transferred here to the U.S. Detention Center at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Station. His attorneys argue that he should not be prosecuted at all because interrogators subjected him to what some people refer to as torture, such as mock executions and the near-drowning technique called waterboarding. Nashiri did not enter a plea during yesterday's proceedings, and it is not clear exactly when that might happen, but the defense counsel did say it would take them at least a year to prepare their defense of Mr. Nashiri, and many of the attorneys and legal experts are predicting that that this will take at least several years to resolve.
I'm curious about one thing. When was he brought to Guantanamo Bay, and why has it taken so long for this legal proceeding to begin?
Nashiri was first captured in 2002 in Dubai, And then, as we mentioned earlier, he was in these secret so-called black site prisons run by the Central Intelligence Agency between 2002 and 2006, during which time he was interrogated. He was believed to be the head al-Qaeda representative on the Arabian Peninsula when he was, in fact, captured. So he was considered what is called a high-value detainee. In 2006, on orders of then-President George W. Bush, he and other high-value detainees, such as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged plotter of the 9/11 attacks on the United States, were transferred here to Guantanamo Bay. And there were a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions and other court decisions that essentially delayed the ability for these military commissions to convene and begin to try the suspects in these various terrorist attacks. And then when President Obama took office, he promised to shut down Guantanamo and basically put a 2-year freeze into effect as he tried to do that. However, the United States Congress blocked all efforts to try these suspects in U.S. federal court and bring them to the United States for justice. So Guantanamo remains open, and the military commissions have just restarted, and this is the first one of the trials to start since President Obama lifted the freeze on the trials here earlier this year.
What's it like at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba? What are the detention facilities like?
Guantanamo Bay is an island. It is, of course, in the southeastern corner of Cuba. The U.S. naval base has been here since the early 1900s and played various roles over the years. It was the home to 45,000 Haitian refugees, for example. But the detention centers over the years started with Camp X-Ray, which became kind of infamous. It was just open cages where the detainees were in orange jumpsuits and shackled and kept out in the open air, to where they are now, which is essentially what are called Camps 5 and 6 and 7. Camp 5 is a maximum security facility where there are a small number of detainees. There's about 168, 170 detainees left in Camp 5, which is a medium security facility. And then there is the Camp 7, which is a top secret camp. The location of it is not known to most of the people on this island, and in that camp are believed to be 15 high-value detainees, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged plotter of the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the United States.
If you're a news junkie and crave the latest news and analysis about the Middle East, follow us on our new and improved Twitter feed, VOA Middle East Wire. You'll find us on Twitter at VOA Middle East. Every day, we tweet VOA's own special reports, analysis, VIP interviews, and podcasts. Plus, you'll get the latest buzz from VOA's entire Middle East producers and correspondents. VOA Middle East on Twitter. Get a read on the news before it happens.
A report by the U.S. government's Commission on Religious Freedom says public schools and madrasas in Pakistan are fueling discrimination by casting Hindus, Christians, and other religious minorities in a negative light. The report also documents how schools in the mostly Muslim country are not teaching religious tolerance. Mike Richmond has details from Washington.
The U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom is funded by the government but independent, and it has actively monitored the rise of violent religious extremism in South Asia. Its new report says textbooks in Pakistan's public schools and madrasas negatively portray Hindus, Christians, and other religious minorities. The commission said such biases fuel acts of discrimination and possible violence. It found that public school textbooks often have a strong Islamic slant and that religious minorities either are omitted or referred to in a derogatory way. The report said Hindus are depicted in especially negative terms and that references to Christians were often inaccurate and offensive. Teachers interviewed for the study had negative views about Christians, Jews, and Ahmadis, a sect of Islam. The commission said teaching discrimination increases the likelihood that violent religious extremism in Pakistan will continue to grow. Religious minority leaders in Pakistan welcomed the report. In an interview with VOA, Haroon Dial of the All Pakistan Hindu Rights Movement said Pakistani schools need to stop promoting religious intolerance.
As a loyal Pakistani Hindu, in my opinion, it is very necessary to take practical actions to remove this kind of education from the text and include other world religious education in the text to promote religious harmony and nationalism in Pakistan.
The education minister of Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, Sardar Hussain Babak, also told VOA the curriculum must be changed.
We are facing so many problems in this regard, like militancy and all these extremism here in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So it is now, I can say, it is in dire need to change, to revise the syllabus and to revise the curriculum.
The International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, a U.S.-based group, conducted the study in coordination with an independent Pakistani think tank, Sustainable Development Policy. The two organizations reviewed more than 100 textbooks in schools from Pakistan's 4 provinces. Students and teachers from public schools and madrasas also were interviewed. Mike Richmond, VOA News, Washington.
On Friday, the United States will honor those who have served in the military with Veterans Day ceremonies around the country, including a wreath-laying at the Tomb of the Unknowns near Washington. Not far from the tomb, there is now a new memorial recently unveiled to honor 14 rabbis who have died while serving as Jewish military chaplains. VOA's Jerome Sokolovsky has more on the remembrance.
Arlington National Cemetery, final resting place for many American military veterans. Rabbi Marvin Dash is the cemetery's Jewish chaplain. He's proud of the new monument that lists the 14 rabbis who died while serving their country.
We're standing in the same line with the other religious groups of our nation, recognizing the service and the sacrifice that was made by members of the Jewish faith.
Jewish chaplains were first allowed to serve during the American Civil War a century and a half ago. In World War II, Rabbi Alexander Good was one of 4 chaplains who were on the U.S. Army transport ship Dorchester when it was torpedoed. Dash says there were not enough life jackets for all the sailors, so Good and 3 Christian chaplains made the ultimate sacrifice.
They said, we're going to stand here, hold arms together, pray, and we're going to give our life jackets to the people that need them in the water. And so they sacrificed themselves right on the spot.
Those immortal chaplains became a symbol of interfaith unity, but something was missing here at Arlington Cemetery. Until a few weeks ago, there were only 3 monuments on this hill, one to the Catholic chaplains who died serving their country, another one to all chaplains who died in World War I, and another one to the Protestant chaplains. The memorial to the Jewish chaplains was dedicated in a ceremony on October 24th. They received military honors in the presence of veterans and lawmakers. Congressman Bob Turner represents a district in New York that is 1/3 Jewish. A veteran himself, he says the monument is a milestone.
An important part of history that probably not many people know much about. And it's important to understand that and recognize it and give everyone a piece of their history of America.
The congressman adds to the small pile of stones already here.
We found a rock.
It's an ancient Jewish tradition that pays respect to the dead. Jerome Sokolovsky, VOA News, Arlington, Virginia.
This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. I'm Susan Yaki, reporting to you from the nation's capital, Washington. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, President Obama gets ready to host Asian leaders at the APEC Summit. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com. voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.